Okay, so for the record, this is, what did we say? It's July 20th, 2009. This is Rob Campbell talking to Charlie Summers and Tom Root about the T28 at South Dakota School of Mines. This is tape 2 of 2, I think I said. Oh, we were talking about you were talking, Charlie, about the T28's use in combat.
Yeah, they did. They used them in Laos. And it was mostly our people flying over the Laotian in the airplane.
So close air support?
Yeah, close air support for the Laotian, our side that was fighting there. Kind of
Close air support means
dropping bombs and shooting guns.
to help folks on the ground.
Yeah.
Get
Yeah,
the pressure off of them.
Yeah.
Bombs and guns.
Yeah.
But that was, I mean, that was that was pretty unusual for a T-28. Although I've heard that T-28s were also sold out to foreign countries,
Yeah.
and they found use for these. And
Thailand had them for a long, long time as a close air support airplane. The Thai Air Force. Now they flew the airplanes, yeah.
Had you ever flown, either of you? You said you flew it in training.
Pilot training.
You flew it in pilot training?
No, it was gone from pilot training when I had a chance to fly T-28. I had a friend of mine who had a T-28, and he was enamored with I was an instructor in F-16s, and this was a rather wealthy young man, Alan Preston out of Dallas. He was a developer, and he had his own little air museum. He had a T-6, which is a tail dragger, also an older trainer, post-World War II. Well, I don't know if I know my dad flew it post-World War II. That's an
Yeah,
86. Anyway, he had a series of airplanes. One of them was a T-28, and he asked me to teach him how to dogfight. So we went up and we did some dogfighting, did some air combat maneuvering with a fellow by the name of Jeff Ethel, who used to be the editor for Air Classics magazine, who has since deceased. He died in a Reno Air Races crash. But he flew the AT-6, and Alan and I were in the T-28, and we were flying that around. So that's where I was initially exposed to the T-28.
And yeah, that, in fact, and Dan Custis had flown the T-28 in the military also in training. I flew it in training. Tom had T-28 time. That was one of the requirements when Tom was hired is that I had put in is that formation flying, so they probably have to be military, and that they have previous T-28 time because we had no way to check a pilot out in a T-28.
And this one,
Because this one is only single seat, so you just had to just have a good discussion of how it flies, and this one was heavier, so it flew a little different, and then you went and flew it. Tom Warner was the first pilot during my period of time that didn't have T-28 time. But he had all the other requirements being military and formation flying. And so he was the first person from the time I started the program, and probably before Dan. I don't know about Sands and some of those. I think those were all had some military background also, so they had probably.
Do you know of any civilian, any non-military pilot who ever flew this T-28?
I think there was, well, Zoom was military too, I guess. I don't think so. Maybe way back at the very beginning, but I don't know the history that good. I think they were all basically, Dave Sands, I think, was Navy.
Wayne Sands?
Wayne, I mean, Sands was Navy pilot.
But you don't know of any
And
civilian?
Zoom was an Air Force pilot, and so no, I don't know of any. Which I think also is the military pilot training, whether you go to Navy, Air Force, is it's a year long, and it's very intensive, and it's very good training. So you don't get those kind of pilots from a civilian training organization. So it would take years of experience that they get in a year. So I think that's why the program was, other than one little problem, was basically as safe as it was, because the military pilots are well trained. They're regimented, so they do the job very well of flying a mission. You tell them what to do, assign it, and they will fly it. And then they could cope with emergencies without a great deal of, as well as anybody.
The one problem you mentioned was the one on the ground.
Yeah,
The
ground accident on landing where the airplane got torn up. And that was pilot error, so it wasn't an airplane problem.
The T28 is not some famous plane.
Nope.
I mean, the model, it's just some trainer, right? It's a fairly
It's just a
ordinary trainer.
The big breakthrough, North American built it. See, North American built the T6, which was the predecessor of the T28.
Mhm.
And T6 is a tailwheel airplane, which is what everybody flew in World War II, essentially, pretty much. It wasn't, I guess the P28 was about one of the few tricycle gear, in other words, nose gear.
Mhm.
Well, they modernized. They said at some point we got to get away from those wheels in the back.
Why is that?
Well, because it is a little more demanding to fly. A tailwheel airplane is. But they get
Because the wheel affects the aeronautics?
no, just ground handling.
Oh, on the ground?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. It's just
In
harder
the-
to steer it
in the air, it
around.
doesn't matter,
Oh,
but
I
on
see.
the ground
I
it's.
see.
So the T28 was a tricycle gear. So that in fact, it had just come in when I went to pilot training. Just started with T28. So yeah, and it's a trainer, and it was built to for lots of landings and hard use, and so it's a sturdy machine. They just build them like a brick because students do have a tendency to push them to the limit.
That's why earlier you said it's a sturdy machine because it's a trainer. Because these are not the greatest pilots, and you just have to have more room for error in a
Yeah,
trainer.
you have to build an airplane that can take some abuse.
Because the kids are going to mess it up.
Students tend to do that because they're learning. That's how you learn, is by scaring, oh no, by stressing the airplane.
So,
Stressing the instructor.
Stress everybody, stress the environment.
this particular plane, how did it fly? You said it flew a little differently. How do you think it?
Well, the airplane, the T-28 had some issues. There was an airworthiness directive that went out, and they said, we want you to beef up what they call the empennage, which is the tail section, because during spin training, they were pulling the tails off. And so that was part of the airworthiness directive, go back in there and beef up all the guts of the airplane back there so that the tail wouldn't come off. Well, when they bought this airplane, they took it down to the bones and beefed up the spar. They did the AD on the tail, and then they came back and armor plated it, where they laid 60 thousandths aluminum over the leading edge, the entire empennage section, and the cowling, and so the airplane actually weighed almost 1,000 pounds more than the maximum zero fuel weight of the airplane that it was supposed to be.
It was built as an A model, which has a max weight of 7,800 pounds. The B and C or D had the bigger engine, so it was heavier. But I think we flew it at about, as I recall, 12,000 pounds.
Almost, yeah.
So we were close to 12,000 pounds.
The original engine on that airplane was a smaller engine.
And
so
the
they-
original engine wouldn't even got it airborne, hardly. I think they did fly it a little bit with the other engine, found they couldn't get above 12 or 14,000 feet. And then they couldn't. It was struggling. So essentially it was a different airplane. And with all of the sensors on it, it was like flying with a barn door open because there's so much drag.
There's about one speed. You take off and land at 140, you cruise at 140, you climb at 140. You
Go through the
descend and go
thunderstorm
through
at 140, everything's 140. So I made it very easy. Tom Warner says, what are because normally a pilot says, what are all the speeds? I said, 140. He said, what are the other speeds? I said, no, that's it, 140. Just write that right there, and then you've got all the speeds you need.
Why couldn't you go slower? You
Well,
couldn't
you
go
could go a
faster.
little slower, but
Could you go faster?
no,
Not much.
That was it.
that was it.
Pedal to the metal, that's it.
Yeah, if you could kind of get in a little dive, you might get 160.
Yeah. But
But
you had
there's-
all the instruments hanging out there.
All that
Yeah.
drag.
It's like you had a
just-
parachute on the back.
Yeah, it's just like having having
speed
some-
brakes out,
Yeah,
gear
speed
down.
brakes,
and,
gear down, everything, it's about the same.
Yeah, and the nose was very heavy because it had a larger engine and it had an armor-plated cowling. So there was a tendency, normally you like to come in and bring the nose up, touch down on the mains, and then just lower the nose. And there was a tendency for that airplane to just land.
As soon as the mains hit,
So
the nose came down, it didn't matter, you could have the stick all the way back.
you had to work at it a little bit to keep from letting the nose slam down.
Yeah.
But that
It
worked.
landed flat, that's what it did. You kind of came in, no matter what you did as a pilot, as long as you had concrete or asphalt below you, as soon as it touched, it just kind of rolled on. And after you got used to that, you didn't fight it, but if you tried to hold the nose off, you weren't going to win because the airplane won.
So is it true that this thing was just like a flying brick?
Yeah, that's it. And we have no concept. Well, it was twice it was landed dead stick. Tom was half dead stick but it could pick up a rate of descent that would be hard to arrest at the end because it is so heavy and so much drag.
Did you ever have an engine failure?
No, I gave them to Tom.
You had one or two or a half or?
Well,
Tell me about that.
I had 1.5.
That's right.
Can you tell me about those?
Well, I told you the tornado story. Coming
yeah.
out of the tornado story, I was only 17 miles from the airport, but at 22,000 feet when I popped out from above the tornado. That had been a 3-month project, and we were well through that project. And we'd gone up, and by the time we were looking for the perfect storm to come right over Goodland, and finally this one happened. But prior to that,
this one that day of the tornado.
yeah, but they had it was a big project. They had storm chasers. They had a 100-mile diameter ring of lightning sensors.
On the
They
ground,
had
yeah.
leased farmers' property 40 miles north and 40 miles south, and actually gone in and poured a cement pad and brought in their dual Doppler radars.
They had
set
two
up-
radars, which is unusual. We always had one for guidance, but they had two, so they could get
And
more
of
data.
course, they had that fleet of storm chasers from the severe weather folks over in Norman, Oklahoma. The cars would chase around. And we had been going for about 6 weeks. And yeah, we'd take off, we'd go, the storm was too far north, or it would fall apart before we got there. And this one, it was my turn in the barrel, and so I launched and I started beating up the storm when he finally said, okay, your escape vector is. And I popped out. I'm 17 miles from the field. I'm 22,000 feet. And so I'm just going to go down, and I'm going to go over here, and I'm just going to kind of come down here. And kind of a counterclockwise pattern. And there's something that fighter pilots do. It's fly right over the runway, and you do a 360-degree turn to land. The downside was that because the tornado was so close, that there was about a 30-knot crosswind from the west running over a north-south runway. And that was our primary runway. And I came down the runway, I'm crabbing into the wind, and just as I break out to do my 360-degree turn, the engine kind of gave it up, meaning that it started to come apart from the inside. And the guys on the ground said, yeah, as soon as you broke, we saw this huge black cloud of smoke and we knew you were in trouble.
You could hear it.
And
grinding itself apart.
it was the airplane. Geez, all of a sudden this thing is making some noises, and I lost the power, and I'm going, I'm out of gas. I can't believe it. And I looked down, no, I got gas. That's not it. But I moved the throttle, and nothing happened. And that moment that I had sort of loosened the turn, I started to get blown away from the airport. And when all of a sudden I realized I have an engine that isn't working, I'm just slightly higher than I normally would have been, because somewhere in there I thought maybe I'll just try my engine out top of the key. I haven't done one of these in a while, and I'll just try my engine out thing, and it worked out. You come in a little high and you brake, and you just...
This is the
Yeah, it's
360
kind of a
thing?
circular pattern, so at any point you can put it on the runway.
losing it and put it on the runway. And I just so happened to be in that position. Anyway.
Is that how you always landed? With
No.
the curly Q at the end?
No.
You just so happened to pick it that day because of the
Yeah, I just picked
wind?
it. Yeah, well, just because I was so high, and I was just
I
coming
see.
down, and I was just gonna plan it, and so I did that. Anyway, I'm having to fight to get back to the runway. There is a cross runway that is east-west that would have put me right into the wind,
Sure.
but I was too short, and it was sod. It was grass. I didn't want to land there. So I struggled around, and finally I got it on the ground with the gear down, and I didn't bend the airplane, but on rollout the engine seized up.
But probably that far from the end of the runway is where he touched down.
Well, I was on the numbers anyway.
It was
Close.
so
You
close.
barely made it to the pavement.
Exactly.
Just made it. And went out there and I couldn't.
You were there?
Yeah. And I couldn't move the prop
You could do
because
pull-ups
all
on
the
prop.
parts had just frozen the engine.
So why did the engine pick tornado day to seize up?
Oh,
Just a coincidence?
Yeah, coincidence.
It's not because you were under more strain or stress or anything?
I choose not to believe that was the case. When the manufacturer that took it apart and rebuilt us an engine, he said that somewhere in the history there was probably a push rod that had
It
gotten bent.
ate
bent.
one of the push rods to the cylinder, just ate it up, one of the cylinders. So, and that jammed everything, so it just quit.
Yeah, it finally failed, and when it failed, it kind of beat around on the inside of the engine and started taking other things apart. And we pulled off the oil sump cap, and we got a handful of metal pieces about the size of your fingernail. You know,
None of them had part numbers. So we knew they were parts, but we didn't know which parts.
And so it took us 10 months from
To
that
get it flying
day to
again.
get it back to Rapid
What
City.
year was this? What project was this?
Well, it was a Goodland. It actually turned out to be one of their very successful projects because of that storm. Everybody, the balloon release team as well. I forgot
Oh
those
yeah, they were
guys.
releasing a balloon up through there that you had to say, where's the balloon? Nobody knew. And we couldn't see, so if you come back with it wrapped over the wing, you found it.
But they chased that tornado for miles. The chasers, and they really got a lot of good data, and that made the project, which was good because we were out. We were out of the game then.
That's the project that had the hail catcher on the ground. Remember the truck with the big,
Oh yeah.
and he was catching hail.
This is a late project.
Yeah, it
It
was
was-
one of the last we did,
One of the
Was it
last
2000
ones,
or-
around I think it was the 2000
Something like that?
timeframe.
somewhere in
Uh,
We had some follow-on
We
problems.
did two projects at Goodland that I recall, and this was the last one, I think.
did
We did one and two at Greeley,
Yeah, we did some at Greeley.
and I don't think we.
And then some at over for past Greeley at, no, it's not.
Fort Collins?
Fort Collins, yeah. We did Fort Collins, Greeley, and then we did,
you guys
Woodland.
both flew the T28 until the end of the program?
Yeah.
When the program ended, you were both flying, and three pilots.
Yeah,
You
Tom.
and Tom. But, so some days you were both there. You were the
Well-
mechanic and you were flying, or you didn't do the 1 week on, 1 week off, or it just depended?
It kind of depended.
Okay.
yeah, and while I was, while we were actually both doing maintenance, why we'd both be there because I stayed there essentially the whole time and Tom would come and fly and help with maintenance
Oh,
and
I
then
see.
he'd have to leave
I see.
because he had to fly for the big airplane.
And Tom Warner was coming in on these projects too?
Yeah, he would come in and sometimes and
It's tough to work on the airplane all night and then expect to go fly it
Sure.
the next day. It'd be nice to have another pilot fly it.
Sure.
And Tom was certainly willing to do
I'd
that.
change the generator all night, get done about, yeah, maybe 8 in the morning, and we'd be ready to go by noon anyway.
But this tornado one was not related to the generator, had nothing to do with the generator.
No,
As far
the
as you know.
generators and the engine and all that, they just,
And it flew again after tornado day.
oh yeah,
It did fly. It took us 10 months to get it back.
we had to pull the engine,
Yeah.
and then Tom took the engine to Minneapolis, right?
Yeah, loaded on the back of a truck, drove it up there.
Drove it up there, left it, then when it was ready,
I went and picked it up, brought it back
Went
to
and picked-
Rapid City, and somebody else drove it down there, and then I
yeah,
went
and then
down
we
there
had to put all the accessories on it. We built the engine up, and then you and I took it down there and put it back on the airplane. And then we.
Using the front end of a John Deere
Yeah,
John Deere.
John Deere loader is how we got it on there. It was improvising. And then I test flew it, and then we brought it back up here. And that's the engine that, is that the same engine that, yeah.
Yes.
Tom lost the accessory section, blew a hole in it at Greeley. And that was the same engine, so we had to change engine one more time.
Well, the manufacturer, when he put it together, had put it together wrong. And we couldn't figure out what was going on. And it eventually failed because he had failed to put a shim in a proper spot. And it ate itself from the inside, from the backside, from the
Accessory case which
from
sits
the
on the
lower
back,
side.
which runs all,
Turbine.
It's like the power takeoff.
yeah, it
kind
runs
of.
all the accessories.
Yeah, and then it kept losing oil, and
Yeah.
it finally failed and blew a chunk through the back end of the engine. So we sent it back to them, and they go, "Oh, whoops! Well, we'll buy this one."
So
And so
they-
they rebuilt the engine again, and it
then
was
we-
rehung.
And then we put it back on in Greeley. We did all this stuff somewhere else.
Yeah.
But I think they did some of it for us. at
They
Greeley.
did in Greeley the second time, but they hooked up the clutch system for the blower wrong. It was analogous, and we didn't figure this out until we had flown it a couple of times. It's analogous to driving a high-performance vehicle and with your foot on the clutch. And what they had done is they had misrouted a cable way in the back that had opened a valve that allowed pressure on the clutch mechanism in the blower section. And it wore all that off, and it fodded the oil, foreign object damage, fodded the oil system, so we were having problems with that, ended up burning some bearings. We had to drop the engine again off the airplane and replace the back side with the guts of the backside with this huge planetary gear and some other new clutch system back in the back. Then put it all back together and rehang the engine again. So there's about 3 times in 3 years that airplane had the engine
Put the
taken
engine off and back on.
Did it start to feel like there was a curse on this
Yeah.
project?
Well,
Did it?
yes, and of course,
Felt
we
like
went
we
back
were-
to Greeley with that to make it work, and then we had issues with the generators.
Generators, yeah, that's
Yeah.
when Berkey was, when we got rid of the airplane, we were trying to design some way to cool the generator and keep the cold water out of it, because that was just obviously making it blow up or fail.
If you get a super hot generator running behind a hot engine and it's generating its own heat, and you quench it with cold water,
Yeah.
Parts are bound to come out.
things fail. So we were going to build a plenum to take the water out and provide cooling air.
You need
to
the cool
generator.
air, because the generator really
Right.
gets hot, but you can't control
There
it.
without the water.
And the flight from here to Lincoln, when I took it down there, it wasn't Lincoln, but wherever I landed there. That was a nice flight, everything.
Oh, at the
ran.
very end, the last flight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
flew it out of here down there to the crooks at the museum that stole it and then sold it. But, yeah, it flew fine. I was kind of saying, gee, one more flight's all I need out of this Hummer. But it flew good. So we finally got it running, but it was becoming more of a challenge. It really was. That's a hard way to treat an airplane, is throw it in a thunderstorm.
And you think that this 3-year run of bad luck wasn't just luck? You think it's because you were pushing the airplane harder
I
in
think
these
we're
storms?
pushing bigger and harder and tougher storms.
Plus,
I mean-
the airplane was a 1947 vintage.
Yeah.
It's getting old, and it's just, you
You end up with different problems, and you're always stomping out fires, no pun, sometimes literally.
yeah.
I had a generator meltdown. I left a puddle of melted aluminum in the back of the engine bay,
Yeah, all the-
about big around. And that's when Dwayne Berkey said, the scientists wanted to get up and go again. Come on, throw another generator on there. And Berkey goes, no, we're down to our last generator, and we're not putting this airplane in the air until we can figure out why they're failing.
Because they can just keep going.
And
Yeah,
our budget was not determined so much by money as it was by the number of generators we had to replace the
And it's
old
an
ones.
old-fashioned generator that's
So,
hard so.
Right.
Yeah.
But they had gone for years with you'd gone for years without the generator having problems.
But we didn't go in the storms that we did
I
at the
see.
end. I think it's all related, the fact that the more vicious the storm is, the more stress you put on the airplane. And the pilots, of course, you don't stress them because they're
Oh,
stressful.
yeah, that's right.
But, so I think the program probably, if they wanted to go bigger and better storms, they probably needed something else. But my opinion on that is they're not ever gonna find another airplane.
Oh, really? Should we
No.
talk about that now? The A10 and all this plan. Tell me the.
You can't put a jet airplane, I don't know,
Into that environment.
into that environment. And I tell
An
people.
A10's a jet.
Huh?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a jet won't go through. It's gotta be a recip. You might get a turboprop jet through if you did it right, but I don't think so.
Yeah.
Because, and the problem is, see, there's only a few people that have gone through and know what's going on inside. And that's the problem. I went to 2 meetings in Washington, and I said, now do you people know, they were talking about airplanes, and I said, do you know what goes on in there? Well, yeah, I know. I said, no. Do you know, there's hail, big hail. And I said, there's ice, lots of ice. Well, yeah, we can handle that. I said, how are you gonna handle it? And they could never come up with an answer how to get a jet engine to eat hail. I said, one guy's engine guy said, they'll eat moisture and rain. And I said, no, not rain, hail. Let's start with 2-inch hail and maybe bigger. And he said, well, I don't know if they'll eat that. I said, well, they're gonna have to. And he said, well, we could screen it. I said, well, then can you handle 4 inches of ice on the screen?
Yeah.
So I don't know what Tom might get his, I don't think you can put a jet airplane through a thunderstorm.
You flew jets?
Yeah,
You flew jets?
still does.
So you're familiar with, still do.
Yeah.
What happens if you put a ton of ice into a jet engine? I don't know anything about jet engines.
Okay, there's different types of jet engine. There's an axial flow and there's a fan engine, where you have a core of turbines that are spinning at about 41,000 RPM, and through gearing and other things, it turns a larger fan on the outside, which is basically say a 27 blade ducted propeller inside this big cowling.
That's what actually pushes you, right?
That in combination with the exhaust of the turbine. And then there's the axial flow, which is just straight turbine, 41,000 RPM, blows up the exhaust and provides you with the thrust.
Okay.
When you take chunks of ice and you throw it in there, it has a tendency to chip metal. And when blades spinning that fast get out of balance, then things come apart.
So it's not the moisture in the ice, it's a solid object
Well, and
getting into the engine.
and you're eating ice, that's,
Yeah, and you also have to keep it lit. I mean, you turn the igniters on, the spark plugs on. Once a jet engine's running, the spark plugs aren't firing anymore. It's just a continuous, like a blowtorch.
Right.
Okay, but you get into lots of heavy rain and ice and stuff. You got to have the igniters on, but that ice can do significant damage. And the big thing is the structural damage at high RPM. Things come apart.
Sure.
but you can build an airplane like the T28 that'll go, the aircraft will go through. But I don't think they haven't solved the engine problem, how to power it. Because we had an airplane that would go, it was almost bulletproof as far as the engine. I mean, our weak link was probably the carburetor, but we could pour stuff in to keep it from icing over. The prop was just a big huge hunk of metal, and you could throw rocks at it and it still wouldn't hurt it.
And it
It'd
was
chip
spinning
it, but it wouldn't
slowly.
hurt it.
That's true.
It was spinning slowly.
Yeah, so I don't think they'll ever get there, and I guess what they're gonna have to do is just say, we're not gonna do research inside thunderstorms,
Now,
because they can't get there.
they want a jet so that they can go higher, farther, mostly higher and farther, right?
And stay up longer,
Yeah.
go chase the storm, and get higher altitudes, because some of them go to 50, and you might need to know what's going on at 40 or 45.
How high could you get with a T-28 again? Did we say
20.
24?
Well, yeah,
25 or so?
the Air Force
Roughly?
has probably put a good handle on it. Above 25,000 feet, the air is thin enough that unless you pre-breathe oxygen for about 30 minutes prior to your departure, going above 25,000 feet becomes a physiological issue
Oh, for the pilot,
for the pilot.
Because the T-28 is not pressurized,
right?
so,
You had a mask on
yeah, that's all you
that
got.
had oxygen?
It was a combination
But
of
not pressure.
outside air
It was just-
and oxygen.
I see.
Yeah. And,
And-
but,
And the other thing is, you're breathing oxygen, and you're okay, but you're a single pilot. There's nobody there to say, you just passed out because your oxygen supply has failed, and you're busy doing things.
Mhm.
So that's why I said we wouldn't go above 25, because that's really pushing it for altitude.
about 25,000 feet without pre-breathing, it's analogous, you can run into physiological problems with the nitrogen in your system.
Yeah.
Much like a scuba diver who spends too much time below breathing compressed air, gets a lot of nitrogen. Well, you already have a lot of nitrogen and you go to 25,000 feet unless you pre-breathe pure oxygen for about 30 minutes prior and continue to pre-breathe or breathe pure oxygen while you're above 25,000 feet, you may end up with symptoms similar to the bends,
If I put in a robot pilot, how high could that plane go?
as high as the aerodynamically it would take it.
So
It, yeah, it would probably make 30 or
But again,
higher.
how you...
But again, not as high as they'd like to go.
Yeah, probably just because you got a supercharged engine, and pretty soon any engine like that's gonna run out of air,
Sure.
and it just,
Could-
that's it.
If they say you're right, it's impossible to make a jet do what we want to do, could they build another prop plane that would just, or,
Yeah, but the replacement cost becomes prohibitive. That airplane that we gave up was worth well over $1 million to replace it.
With something halfway similar.
right? So, in other words, a T-28 is about as good as a prop plane would do.
I think so.
You wouldn't get that much more out of a slightly different prop
You
plane.
could make it, perhaps if you could get it as strong as it was, only lighter, then you'd be
Oh.
able to,
I see.
you know. But that's a task that's pretty demanding, is how to make something that'll withstand the hail and damage and make it lighter.
Do you know of any other model of airplane that they should have done storm penetration with besides a T-28? Or did they make a really good selection?
I think they made a good selection, but I think it was a little bit of availability,
Mhm.
because they got it for like $1
Yeah.
from the Forest Service or whoever had it in Alaska. And they were using them just for firefighting, and they were going out of service because they were too hard to maintain.
Mhm.
And then the modifications on it were pretty expensive
Mhm.
for that time anyway. But I don't think they could have found a better airplane. Just because basic construction is really good because of what it was used for. It wasn't made to go fast, so you didn't have to worry about fast.
Right.
And
Systems were simple.
Systems were simple, and it was pretty good for the mission. But they don't make a T-28 anymore or anything similar. You know, everything is, if it's got a prop on it, it's
Driven by a turbine engine.
yeah.
Is it basically fine with you pilots that it was a single
See,
seat? That's all right, or that's not a crime?
Well, he doesn't want me screaming like a little girl in the back.
help, let me down. I see what our background is, and Tom's was slightly different, but not that much, because he was in the training command, and then he flew B-1s, I think, or vice
Tom
versa.
Warner.
Warner.
Right.
But we both were single-seat fighters, so
So the F4 was
The
two seats.
F4 was
but-
2 seats, but you had a navigator back there, and you just told him to be quiet, don't make any noise, I'll tell you when we land.
And then I flew the F-16 and he was the F-100 and those are
And
just
so
one
you,
seat.
in addition to the skills, you have the mentality that I can do all this myself. And essentially it's a little bit of confidence, but it's more of a attitude, don't you think?
Right.
Yeah, some people would say, I'm gonna be in there alone, oh my gosh, how will I do all this? And you say, well, I can do all this in maybe a more sophisticated, faster airplane, I can certainly handle this.
And in this T28, there wasn't a whole lot of time or budget for training someone,
No,
getting them used to all that.
Oh, no.
no, training was kind of
It was a requisite for review
yeah.
of systems and for the aircraft in terms of the FAA and how we conducted our business.
And
So
knowing
we
what
had
to do.
in-house training about how the airplane works and systems review and that sort of thing. So we filled those squares, but
But
you're
we
right.
almost had to have experienced pilots to fly it, because you wouldn't be taking somebody with 500 hours and saying, okay, you're gonna go fly a T-28 in a thunderstorm. And that wouldn't have worked. Don't you think?
I agree.
It would have.
First time the generator smoked them.
Yeah, then they'd probably do a little hyperventilating there, suck all the oxygen out.
By the way, when the generator went, it went several times on both of you. That means, well, the data instruments are dead. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah, they would go down, but
He had battery
The
power
sensors.
left.
Oh, battery
He
power
had
was still there.
battery power left.
And that lasted how long?
30 minutes.
And you
Enough to get you on the ground.
and you could shut things down you didn't need, so immediately the computer would go down, you can turn it off and it'll save everything that's in it. And so you can start turning off recording. Really want to turn off heaters, because some of the instruments had heaters. They're a big draw. That's probably another reason the generator was suffering, because he had to run all those heaters.
Oh, you think it was drawing a lot of...
Well, it did
Oh, yeah.
draw a lot.
But if a generator goes, you immediately start heading home?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and
Because
shutting down non-essential items.
Get everything off.
Turn off everything you can.
Right.
And if the battery power goes out, then does the engine die?
No.
But your instruments are dead, but that's all right, basically? The
Yeah,
radio would be
The
dead.
ones you need, that'll keep you alive.
Yeah.
Will continue to operate on battery power until it dies, and then you have, you should be VNC. You should be out of the weather by then.
The battery never died. You never got as far as no power.
No,
You always went home on battery backup.
we always had some power to get it on the ground, yeah.
You told me about your engine failure. You said you had 1.5? That wasn't the half, that was the one.
That was the one.
Tornado Day was the one. What was the half?
Well, when I was telling you that we were having issues, the manufacturer put the engine together
Oh,
wrong. Tom Werner was flying the airplane out of Greeley, and he had an indication that he had lost all the oil. So he was over Cheyenne, Wyoming, and he circled back down and landed there. I came back from flying with Continental, only to discover that Charlie wasn't in Greeley anymore. He was up in Cheyenne working an oil issue. So I drove up there. He and I worked the day, and we got drained all the oil and checked it for problems. We put it all back together, fired it up. I stood in the back while the engine was running, and I'm looking for oil leaks. I can't find anything. But it looked, for all the world, like somebody had taken a hose and just hosed down the airplane with oil up in the engine. And where did all this oil come from? Where did it go? Why? But, and we have a little indicator called a chip light that tells you that there are metallic parts that have arrived at a magnet down below, and it turns on a light saying that there's engine parts that are coming apart. So,
Is this a sump light?
yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
some chip lights
So we had,
down the lowest
when the
part.
chip light comes on, you need to pay attention to it, put it on the ground. And we got it, the oil changed, everything was good, we ran it, everything was good. I took off to come back to Greeley, airplane's ready to go, and it was just departing the traffic pattern in Cheyenne, and I had a chip light, so I landed in Cheyenne. We worked all the next day and got back going again. Finally got it back to Greeley, code 1, ready to go. Charlie took it up in the air, and he had an issue, and he brings it back to me, and it's covered with oil again, and the chip light, and he hands it over. He says, I got to go back to Rapid City. So he left, and I grabbed a hold of one of the local mechanics, and well, again, we cleaned the engine all up, and we looked for telltale problems with the chip light, got that all squared away, and fired it up, ran dry. So I says, time to make a test flight. So I took off out of Greeley. I got about 4,000 feet, 4 miles north of the field, and I'm talking to Denver, trying to get a clearance so I can climb up to about 18 and go to high blower with it, and
See if that's what's doing
and
it.
see if that's what's doing it. And about that time, the engine just kind of rolls back, and
Before you even got onto high blower?
yeah, it just it went from, the airplane is naturally boosted, so it's carrying a lot of extra manifold pressure. And then if you go to high blower, it really boosts the amount of pressure that's in the cylinders. And anyway, the bottom line is it just rolled back to just a normally aspirated engine, and it just wasn't performing at all. So I turned around. About that time, Denver calls me and says, okay, you ready for your clearance? I said, never mind, I'm going back. Well, how come? I said, well, I got a problem with the engine here. Oh, you want to declare an emergency? No, I'm just busy right now. I'll talk to you later. He said, well, call me on the ground. Make sure you get there all right. Yeah, okay, fine. So anyway, I landed the opposite direction and just kind of ticked in there. The engine's just not doing really good. And I get into shut it down, and it's drenched with oil. And
This time though,
yeah,
blowing a hole in the back.
blowing a hole in the back. And the mechanic that I was working with, before I ever got out of the cockpit, he's got a flashlight in there, and he goes, is it possible for you to have a crack in the back of your bell housing there? I go, well, yeah. He says, I think I found it. And sure enough, it finally had come apart because that shim wasn't in there. Blew the back out of that engine. So.
This had all been the fault of the guys back in Minneapolis.
Absolutely.
Put it together.
Yeah, I put it together. So that was the other half. The engine was still ticking. It didn't seize up on me, but it wasn't working for beans. It was about ready to quit.
Besides going into bigger storms, supercells, did the program change over the time that you guys were involved with it? Is this a program that was clearly pooping out every year? You know what I mean, running down, or was it doing fine, or was it about the same?
They were having, I sensed, although we didn't get involved in that, they were having a harder time getting money for projects.
They were.
Yeah, I think, and when we first started, we'd do small projects. I went to Bismarck on one that was not very big, but at the end, you either had a big project like the one at Greeley where we had people from everywhere doing all these things simultaneously. You either had a project like that or you didn't have one. In other words, the little project where we'd go out and just do something in a smaller scale was apparently not in the cards for them to spend money for.
Yeah.
So you either had the big project where everybody's involved, everybody's aboard, and it's really big and coordinated, or you didn't have a project at all.
I think too, there was probably an oversight, and a lot of times there are lots of people in the world that are looking at meteorology, trying to figure things out. Mm-hmm. And we had a perfect instrument platform that we could provide some other institution if we so wished to do that. And so if they had something new and better and that they needed to look at and they could get funding, we could provide that instrument platform for them to do that.
Sure.
And I think that was probably a failing generally on the part
To
of...
sell it as a platform that could do something nobody else could do.
And it might have made for more money available for us to keep the airplane running and keep the project going, not having to depend entirely on the National Science Foundation for our funding.
Wait, so you're saying what was the mistake is to?
Well, I think they
Is it-
didn't, we did, whoever we are,
Right.
didn't sell the program, not sell the program, but sell the aircraft as a platform. Because there's so much more we could do with it, because it could do so much.
Right.
Because it could go where other planes couldn't go, period.
Right.
So I think maybe there was overlooking, but of selling it, if you will, to research people is kind of what Tom was saying, to do research with this platform. We can put different sensors on it. What do you want? You want to sense temperature? You want to sense whatever?
Right.
It's just a good platform, or was.
And when we lost our funding from the National Science Foundation, the project died. And if we had had other people that were
I
interested in
see.
using the airplane, we could keep
More
it
variety,
funded.
diversity
and-
of funding sources.
Exactly.
And give it
Oh, I
other
see.
jobs with other sensors, as long as you can, I've seen research done with small, little bitty experimental airplanes. But our niche was the fact that we could do it in severe conditions.
Right.
And nobody else can do that. And they don't have anybody yet that can do that.
The proof of that was that there was a scientist out there that believed that we were giving reports on ice. He says, I think you're generating your own ice. And I want you to fly through ice fog at 50 feet with this radar altimeter out in
Behind
Reno and
Behind a King Air.
behind another airplane that
Wait,
you
who
wouldn't
said this?
see.
Some researcher.
Yeah, and he got funding. So he paid for us to put in a radar altimeter, and he paid for us to deploy the airplane to Reno, Nevada.
We were
from
going to
here.
fly on a dry lake bed 50 feet below the trail of the King Air in ice fog
Why?
to prove
prove
that
a
we
point.
were making ice rather than.
Because he was saying our data was faulty.
I have no idea.
Well,
Quite
you never did
frankly.
this.
We did it for.
But we did it at altitude. You finally did it in
Well,
Fargo.
we did it. Well, I tried Fargo. We did it. 2 years we sat alert all during this ice fog period.
Oh, I see.
Actually, out of Carson City, I think. is where
Yeah,
we
yeah,
were.
right.
Just next to Reno. And nothing happened. I'm sitting here, I sat there for a week, and then I'd come home and I'd be on standby, or Tom would be.
I'd be up there for a week.
If you get a call, go, or
The ice fog, it's the ice fog, go, go, go.
But you never flew.
we never
You
flew,
never
because they
flew.
never got the conditions.
It never did happen.
Then we took
No.
the airplane to Fargo, because
Oh.
they said, we have ice fog in Fargo. We never got the conditions there. Tom recovered the airplane from there in the middle of the winter.
Yeah.
So finally, I got a call, and they said, we think we got ice fog down by Denver. And we were flying with the Wyoming King Air. I said, okay, I can be there. We had the airplane parked there at, not Greeley, but
Fort Collins.
Fort Collins. It was parked in the hangar there.
Mhm.
So I ran down there, flew my airplane down. Got there and they said, next morning it's gonna happen. So we took off, we're flying formation. I'm behind the King Air. Now to add one more element to it, they
Flares.
wanted flares under the wings. That they would light this flare to see what it would do with ice fog. And I had real apprehension. I said, excuse me, now we're gonna light a flame under, and you can't jettison it, it's bolted on. You're gonna light this flare
You
under.
push a button and it lights?
Yeah, under my wing, and my airplane's on fire till it burns out. And then if it doesn't burn out, then pretty soon I see the wing smoking, and if we did carry a parachute, then I'm over the side. But anyway, I went up and we did the ice fog thing there, but we did it at altitude. There was no reason to do it at 50 feet because the ice fog was up here rather than over the lake. But that was an interesting experience because I'm in the ice fog for a while and we're getting whatever we need. I don't know what they're getting, but I'm doing my thing. So then the King Air says, we got to recover, we're iced up. I said, you're not the Lone Ranger here, I'm hurting. So I came around, shot an ILS, which is an instant approach where you've got guidance this way and this way.
Uh-huh.
And I'm flying this thing with full power. And that's not normal.
Hmm.
And I'm carrying ice, lots of ice. And my decision now is, when do I put down the gear? Because when the gear comes down, I'm gonna sink more. So I wait till about 200 feet, I think it'll go. So I break out, I got the runway, I put the gear down, I get the gear at about 100 feet, and now I'm full power landing. And I put it on, taxi in, park it. And now it's not freezing down there, but it was up there. And it was just interesting. I don't know if we got a picture, but about 30 minutes later, after it warms up, there's just a ring of ice around the whole airplane. You can see an outline of a T28 in ice laying on the ramp. And I said, that's the end of the icing. And I said, I'm not flying it again.
Did you ever fire the flare?
I fired the flare.
Oh, you did it with a
Yeah, I came back and the flare was
one
burned
flare,
out.
2 flares?
One flare on the right wing. But I don't know what that was all
And that
about.
was the sole ice fog flight, one flight.
Yeah, but he had enough funding.
But the guy, Woodley, was the guy that,
Woodley, you said?
Woodley.
Yeah.
We knew him in Texas. The little short guy that kept saying, go fly, go fly, go fly. We said, shh, shh. I say short, that means he's short. Anyway, Woodley had the money. And from that one flight, he wrote this big report about ice fog. I have no idea what ever happened. Or
Again,
Said he thought you were making your own ice?
Yeah. His thesis was that our exhaust was making the ice.
Oh.
And that's what he was out to prove.
In
It's the
supercooled
right
water or
icing
something.
conditions, yeah.
That's
Oh,
why
I
they
see.
call it hydrocarbons, because have you ever sat behind somebody and watched water drip out of their tailpipe?
Yeah.
Have you ever
So
seen?
that's what- that was his
Contrails,
theory.
right?
Contrails?
Yeah.
Those are all ice crystals.
Nobody ever knew what he concluded from all of his
Which one of you has a higher risk tolerance when you're out flying?
risk.
Yeah, would you have kept, I have no idea. Would you have kept flying and say, no, that's fine, I can do another few of those? Or would you have been, say, I wouldn't even do that one? Or do you have any sense between the two of you? Or between the two of you and, I don't know, Warner or Dan or the other pilots?
Pretty close to the same, I would think,
I would think
for
so,
us.
yeah.
See, I have no qualms about rolling in to kill somebody who's shooting at me. Because I've done it hundreds of times. And I usually got the first shot in one.
So if people thought, if people out there think, well, they fly into thunderstorms, they want to do this because they're thrill seekers. Is that true? I don't know if thrill seekers is the right word, but do you like the risk? Do you love danger?
I don't know.
Do you like jumping off of cliffs and, I don't know. Do you do other risky behavior?
I don't know.
There's some of that probably. Yeah, I parachute too. I've got 180 some parachute jumps.
Yeah.
I've jumped at night. I've jumped in the snow.
Do you do things, I mean,
And I don't know why I do that.
Do you do things that other people consider reckless?
I do, yeah, probably. I did. I'm
Well,
not
some
as
people
much
think
anymore.
if-
I've matured.
Sure. Recently?
Last week. Not last night though, but last week.
That's
What do you think?
that's kind of a subjective thing.
I know it is.
Some people think if you cross against the traffic, that's the most riskiest thing you could ever do.
Yeah.
So, certainly you try and tell somebody that you fly airplanes into thunderstorms and Charlie he's a movie star. He's been on the Weather Channel and Learning Channel and
Didn't learn
so
anything.
other people that look at this, they go, well, he must have huge breasts.
Whatever.
And I suppose, in some people's estimation, that was probably not the smartest thing to do, but I always justify it by saying, well, I got a parachute. The airplane comes apart, I can always get out.
There's something that, and I don't know what Wayne Sands. I don't know what he flew in the Navy. I'm guessing in the Navy, you probably got an 80% chance of flying fighters. I think that there's and I don't know the background of all the other pilots, but there is a different mentality in fighter pilots. And that is something that we share, because fighter pilots do things on a daily basis when they're flying fighters that the average pilot would
You have no concept
have
of.
no concept of and would say, whoa, because I think Tom's probably seen it, and I have. I lost a wingman. It just got blown out of the sky, and he was right behind me, so it could have been me, but they hit him. And we've seen lots of people we flew with die in accidents during peacetime.
Right.
Because the kind of work you do in a fighter, I mean, you take a big hunk of aluminum with weapons on it and aim it at the ground.
Even if missiles and bullets don't get shot.
Yeah, I mean, just
You
train
kill yourself.
Yeah, I've probably been in memorial services for more people in peacetime than we did in combat, actually, because they just get killed. It's a risky business, so does that mean if you're a fighter pilot that you like risk, or maybe you just accept it but there is...
It's a personal challenge, I
Yeah.
think, too.
I kind of like to drop a dive bomb and see it hit on target, shoot holes and things.
For both of you, your radar person was always Andy Detweiler. Or is that not true?
Most all the
He
time.
was, yeah, he
But
was
was
sitting
Dennis
there,
Russell
but he
still
was...
around?
Well, early on in the program, we had this guy that would come in just for the project.
Oh,
Remember?
was it Dennis Mussel?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Dennis.
I'm just curious about that interaction, because that's the person you're communicating with, principally, besides the...
They kind of have your welfare in their hand, because you don't, with
Right.
the T28, you didn't have radar, you didn't know where you were. I mean, you could be,
And that interaction was smooth? Or was there always, they always want you to do this, and you always say, no, I want to do that, or what is that
Well,
like?
they would ask you, would you please do this? And
So
so you do that if you can accommodate them. If it becomes, where you can't, then you do something else.
They let you know what they would like,
Yeah.
from the science side.
Right.
and then you had to look at it. Maybe we really shouldn't do that today. You have to do that once in a while.
But you didn't feel that Andy was pushing you as far as he could? Well, you know what I mean?
He would they would make requests of you, and being the on-scene guy, you had to make the determination whether it was feasible to accomplish that.
And if you said no, did you catch flack about it that night, or any blowback, or any
No.
resistance? They
Because
just said, okay.
generally, we were able to do what they needed to do. For instance, they were working diligently at helping develop the dual Doppler radar. But in order to do that, they had to really find out, is there hail over here? Turn 30 degrees right, go about 3 miles, tell us what you see. Well, if you get beat up by hail, you tell them that, and they go, okay, we expected that. You know, and, but unless we went over there and looked, they wouldn't know. And if we had the capability to do that, then they would prove their theories, which is what we were up there for.
Yeah. And the only statement that I would harass Andy about, he said, "Can we do this?" And I'd say, "Andy, I can do it." I don't hear any heavy breathing up here, so I must be alone.
Hey, earlier, this is a follow-up question. Earlier you said the frustration was that if there was a practical application of this for pilots, that was
quite a
not,
bit of it.
that was not pursued. That was not the focus. Is that?
The focus, in my opinion, Tom might have a different one, it was research for research sake. In other words, we would gather this data, and then the data crunchers and the data interested people would come up with theses and papers, and this would be, and that's okay, because that needs to be done probably to get to the other part. But the part that I probably contribute as much by not doing more, is there's so limited number of people, there's just a handful, 2 handful of people that have done this, period, in the world, not just the United States, in the world. And that experience should be shared with more pilots. And that didn't get done because there was no program. So it was probably up to me to do that.
Because this is basically a meteorological program about
Yeah,
weather.
that's all it is.
It's not, but you think there might have been more of
There's
sort of
aviation
aviation
safety side.
Sure.
Yep.
aspect.
Oh, yeah.
Would that mean doing different things in the field projects?
No, field project,
Or is it
same.
just a question of communicating?
Taking
Personal
the
experience.
taking the personal experience and making an avenue. And that probably wasn't the school's focus. It should have, the ones that I blame quite a bit are the FAA, because as I understand it, the Federal Aviation Administration was offered to be not in the program, but associated with the program.
I see.
And
That would have been a
recipient of all
direct
those dollars.
feedback to all the pilots that fly in the United States.
I see.
And they said, no, we get our own data, we don't need that, we don't need this. So that, I think,
Yeah, that's-
and maybe it wasn't presented to them the right way at the
I-
highest level, I don't know.
I never thought about it in all these discussions I've
Yeah.
had. FAA never comes up.
And see, they're the ones that are supposed to keep things safe, or at least, and we learn this, the biggest thing I learned anyway, is when you get first indication of hail, turbulence, or heavy rain, turn around, go back.
Yeah.
And as I say, I sat with 3 inspectors in an office, and I finally used my famous words, which endear me to everybody. They said, well, you can't make a 180-degree turn in a thunderstorm. I said, bullshit. I've done it. How many times you want me to tell you I did it? I did it. Well, we're not changing the manual, and it's in an FAA manual to go,
Yeah.
when you hit a thunderstorm, go through. Keep your wings level and go through.
They think it'll be over very quickly?
Well, that's what they
Would it?
think, but it depends on where you're headed. True. If you're on the edge, yeah. If you're in the middle, you ain't coming out. And that's what happened to the astronaut. He
So-
came out the bottom. of course.
They think if you try to turn around, you'll have more trouble?
Yeah.
Turbulence, trouble?
That is the theory with the wordage they have in the instrument manual for thunderstorms.
Ah.
They have a thunderstorm section in the instrument manual because it applies to flying instruments.
So maybe if they had been involved in a little more formal way, it would have almost
Well-
been like a aviation research thing.
Could prove to them that, you know,
Yeah.
and that was the thrust of my article that I wrote for the Safety Magazine was, you just get yourself turned around 180 degrees, go back, whatever you came through, you're gonna have to go back through, but that's the worst you're gonna get.
So you told them in that article,
Yeah, and they don't,
right?
yeah.
Whether they heard or paid attention or...
No.
I think the FAA is, their attitude is that the average pilot, is not, probably spending a lot of time flying strictly on instruments. Combine that with any hail, heavy rain, engine problems that come from heavy rain,